On Maple Street mornings smelled like coffee and sawdust. From our porch swing, I watched the sun spill over the neighbor's maple and turn Henry's workshop windows into bars of gold. He'd be inside already, my husband of 40 years, running his calloused fingers across a plank, the way some men touch a violin listening for the hidden song in the wood. We liked simple things, warm bread, hand-me-down jokes. Sunday hymns we sang off-key but loud. In a town like ours in Oregon, you could believe the world was small enough to hold in two hands. We raised 2 boys in that house, and that's where the story both softens and splits. Richard, our firstborn, arrived grinning at life. He had the kind of laugh that made you forget grocery lists and overdue bills. By 10, he was measuring lumber beside his dad. By 15, he was fixing neighbors' porch steps after school. If kindness had a posture, it was the way Richard stood straight-backed ready. Damien came 5 years later. He was a winter child, quiet, watchful, beautiful in a way that made you want to protect him. He didn't laugh so easily, but when he did, it felt like the sun slipping out from behind clouds. I told myself that was enough, that any distance I felt was just temperament, just the way God knits some souls together tighter than others. A mother is supposed to love without comparing, and I believed I did. Sunday dinners were our cathedral. We ate at the oak table Henry carved the year Richard turned 8, his first real commission he liked to tease, paid in toothy smiles and a finger paint masterpiece. After church, we'd pass around a roast or a pot pie, and the men would brag about who could whittle a cleaner joint. I'd bring out apple crisps still hissing at the edges, and the boys would clean the pans with their fingers when they thought I wasn't looking. On those afternoons, time felt generous. I let myself imagine grandchildren tumbling down the hall summer baseball games, the steady click of Henry's lathe in the shop, like a heartbeat we could count on forever. But families don't break with a crash, not at first. They split along hairline cracks no one wants to see. I remember the first one. Richard and Damien were by the sink, both taller than me by then, arguing without sound. Not quite a fight, more like a dare. Richard's jaw tight, Damien's mouth a straight, thin line. When I stepped in, they peeled apart with matching smiles. Just talking, plays Richard said, as if football strategy required clenched fists. I laughed and told them to set the table. Later, I folded that moment like a grocery receipt and pushed it deep in a drawer I never opened. Henry would take me walking in the evenings along the Greenbelt Trail. He'd talk about building a small cabin by the coast after retirement, one long window staring at the ocean, a bed that creaked in all the old comforting ways. "We'll drive down with a thermos," he'd say, and watch the fog lift like a curtain. I would nod, and the plan would settle into me like warmth. If there were shadows behind us, the Pacific breeze would brush them away. That was the story I told myself. When Richard turned 20, he bought a second-hand camera and started taking pictures of small things, a loose hinge on the garden gate, the way sawdust blooms in sunlight, Henry's hands. He said he wanted to remember us exactly as we were. Damien, meanwhile, kept mostly to himself, books, headphones, quietly excellent grades. Different lanes, I told Henry at night. Same road. He kissed my forehead and said what he always said, "We're fine, Hilda. You made us a home." Maybe that's why I missed it. Maybe that's why so many people do. Love makes you generous with explanations and stingy with fear. I thought I was keeping us safe by refusing to borrow trouble. I didn't know trouble was already inside the house sitting at my table buttering its bread, the way we do edges, first careful not to tear. On the night everything began to change, the porch swing creaked in a wind that felt too sharp for October. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once, then went quiet as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I carried in the last of the plates and called my boys to wash up. Only one answered. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things. If this opening chapter pulled you in, tap, like drop a comment with your thoughts and follow. The night Richard didn't come home was colder than any winter I'd known. The air hung heavy with mist, and even the clock on the kitchen wall seemed to tick slower, as if afraid of what would happen when it reached midnight. I kept reheating the stew on the stove, pretending he'd walk through the door any minute, complaining about the chill and asking if there was bread left. By 11, Henry said he'd take the truck and look for him. He's probably with friends, he told me, but his voice carried no conviction. Damien stayed in his room, the faint hum of his music seeping through the walls. I remember knocking on his door, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you heard from your brother?" He paused too long before answering. "No, Mom. He probably just lost track of time." His tone was calm, too calm, and something in his eyes when he opened the door made my stomach twist. A flicker, small but sharp, like a match being struck and then smothered. When dawn came, it wasn't with hope, but with the sound of Henry's boots on the porch, slow and uneven. He didn't have to say anything. I could tell from his face. The police found Richard's body at the bottom of the gorge near the old railway bridge. They said it looked like he'd slipped in the dark, that the rocks were wet, that it was just a terrible accident. I remember clutching Henry's jacket and screaming, but the sound didn't feel like it came from me. It felt like something tearing loose from the earth itself. The funeral was quiet, gray, and windless. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to my mother's burial, though it felt tighter now, as if grief had grown inside me, pressing against every seam. Damien stood beside me, his hand hovering near mine, but never quite touching. His face was dry, unreadable. When I finally looked into his eyes, I saw nothing there. No tears, no rage, no recognition of the brother we were burying. It was as if a curtain had dropped between us, and behind it lived someone I didn't know. After the funeral, our house became a museum of silence. Richard's tools stayed in Henry's shop where he'd left them, one unfinished chair, sitting in the corner, the wood still marked with his pencil lines. I couldn't bring myself to dust it. At night, I'd sit in Richard's room, tracing my fingers along his desk, pretending he might walk in and ask me to leave because he needed to study. Henry would find me there and gently lead me back to bed, whispering the same words every time. "You have to rest, Hilda." He wouldn't want this, but rest was a foreign country I couldn't reach. Damien changed in ways I didn't understand. He started helping Henry in the workshop, doing chores without being asked, bringing me flowers from the yard. He'd touch my shoulder softly when passing by, say, "You okay, Mom?" in a voice that sounded rehearsed. I thought it was his way of coping, of trying to fill the space his brother left behind. But sometimes when he thought no one was watching, I caught glimpses of something else, relief maybe, or satisfaction, and that terrified me. There was one evening, about a month after the funeral, when I walked into the living room and found Henry staring at the old family photo hanging above the mantel. It was from a summer picnic, both boys in matching overalls, their faces smeared with watermelon juice. "Do you think he's at peace?" I asked softly. Henry didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was low. "Richard, maybe. I hope so." Then he looked at me with eyes that seemed heavier than they'd ever been. But peace doesn't come easy when there are questions we can't ask anymore. I didn't understand what he meant, not then. I thought he was just talking about grief, about the hollow places left behind. I didn't know he was carrying a truth so dark it would rot silently between us for decades. Years passed and the edges of pain dulled, though it never disappeared. People said time heals everything, but that's a lie the living tell each other to survive. Grief doesn't heal. It settles and finds a chair in the corner and waits. By the time Damien married Melissa, the quiet in our home had started to resemble peace again. Henry laughed more, and sometimes I even joined him. We built new routines, visiting the farmer's market on Saturdays, volunteering at church, pretending our family was whole. But every time Damien smiled, I caught the echo of that long night, the pause before he'd said no, the emptiness in his eyes at the funeral. Still, I forced myself to believe he was good. He was my only son left. I thought love could rewrite what fear whispered. But as I'd come to learn, some silences are not born of grief. Some are born of guilt. And the difference, though invisible, is fatal. Melissa came into our lives like a burst of sunlight after a long storm. She was everything a mother could hope for in a daughter-in-law, kind, respectful, eager to help. The first time Damien brought her home for dinner, she wore a soft blue dress and carried a pie she'd baked herself. "It's blueberry," she said shyly. "Damien told me it's your favorite." I remember smiling, touched by her effort. She had a way of filling a room, of making you feel seen. And for the first time in years, I saw Damien genuinely smile. It softened something in me that had long gone cold. Maybe I thought this woman could bring back the light we'd lost when Richard died. Maybe she could heal what time and grief had failed to mend. Their wedding was small, held in our backyard under the maple tree that Richard and Damien had planted as boys. Henry built the arch himself, and I strung white lights along its edges until it looked like something out of a dream. When Melissa walked down the aisle, Damien's eyes shone with something close to tenderness. I held Henry's hand tightly, whispering, "Maybe this is our second chance." He nodded, though his expression was unreadable. After the wedding, life began to feel ordinary again. Melissa called me Mom, and she meant it, or at least she made me believe she did. Every Sunday they came over for dinner, bringing laughter and stories about the new furniture business Damien had started with Henry's help. Whitmore Crafts, the sign said in proud carved letters. Henry would glow with quiet pride each time he passed it. When their first child, Ethan, was born, I thought my heart would burst. Holding him tiny and perfect, I felt Richard's absence and presence all at once. Then came Lily, sweet and bright as her mother. The sound of little feet running through our house brought warmth back to spaces that had felt haunted for decades. For a while, everything truly seemed good again. But happiness, I've learned, can be deceitful. It whispers of safety just before the ground gives way. It started subtly, almost tenderly. One afternoon, Melissa and Damien came by with takeout and sat us down at the dining table. "Mom," Dad Damien began, "we were talking, and we think you should start thinking about the future." I frowned. "The future? You're both 60 now," he continued, his voice smooth, casual. "We just want to make sure everything's in order, your wills, the house, your accounts. You know, to protect you." Melissa smiled sweetly and reached across to pat my hand. "We just want to help," she said. "You've taken care of us for so long. Let us take care of you now." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way Damien looked at Henry, steady, calculated, made me uneasy. I caught a flicker in his eyes, the same hollow darkness I'd seen at Richard's funeral, the one I had forced myself to forget. Still, we agreed to meet with our longtime lawyer, Mr. Albright. It felt harmless, responsible even. Henry said it would make things easier for the kids someday. I nodded, trying to ignore the weight in my chest. At the lawyer's office, Melissa wore a green dress and a smile so wide it almost looked rehearsed. "Now we're officially a family forever," she whispered when I hugged her afterward. Her perfume was sweet, almost cloying. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, listening to the clock tick, wondering why something as simple as signing a few papers made me feel like I'd just handed over a piece of my soul. In the months that followed, Damien and Melissa's visits grew more frequent and less affectionate. They didn't come to talk or to share meals anymore. Instead, they brought lists, new investments we should consider, repairs, we should fund policies, we should update. Their conversations, once warm and familiar, became filled with numbers, percentages, and polite demands. Mom, Melissa said one afternoon as she examined our living room, "This house must be exhausting to maintain. You should think about selling it and moving into a smaller place, something easier. We could help you find one." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every piece of furniture Henry had built, every photo on the wall, as if appraising them. Henry chuckled uneasily. "We love this place, Melissa. It's our home." Damien's smile faltered for a second. "It's too big for two people. You should let us help you make smarter decisions." Something inside me went cold. It wasn't what he said it was, how he said it, like a son rehearsing a script written for him by greed. That night, as I was washing dishes, Henry came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're quiet," he said softly. "I just feel watched," I whispered, "by our own son." Henry hesitated, then sighed. "He just wants to help Hilda. He's trying to protect us." I turned to face him, searching his eyes. "Are you sure?" He looked away. "I want to be." We didn't speak of it again, but the air in the house grew heavier with each passing week. I started locking the door when I was alone. I caught Melissa in the study one afternoon, pretending to look for a pen, but clearly scanning through Henry's files. When she noticed me, she laughed lightly. "Oh, silly me. I was just curious about those pretty old documents." It was then that I finally admitted to myself what my heart already knew: the family we'd built on love and forgiveness had become something else, something hungry, watchful, and patient. And I couldn't shake the terrible thought that once again, danger was coming from inside the family I had devoted my life to protecting. The day we signed the new will was bright and windless, the kind of morning that should have felt safe. The maple tree outside our house glowed gold, scattering leaves like blessings across the porch. But as I buttoned my best coat, my hands trembled. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, just age. Henry said I was being silly. It's paperwork, Hilda. That's all. We drove to Mr. Albright's office in silence. Damien and Melissa followed us in their car, cheerful as newlyweds on vacation. They waved every time we stopped at a light, and Melissa even blew me a kiss. I tried to smile back, but something about the gesture unsettled me, too bright, too rehearsed. Inside the office, the smell of lemon polish and old paper filled the air. Mr. Albright, gray-haired and kind-eyed, had been our family lawyer for decades. He greeted us warmly, unaware that the people sitting across from each other at his polished oak table were not simply a loving family, but actors in a quiet tragedy already in motion. "We'll go over everything carefully," he said, sliding documents toward us. "You can decide what feels right." Henry nodded. "We've discussed leaving the estate to Damien and Melissa. They'll handle things when we're gone." My heart sank. When we're gone. The words carried a finality that chilled me. I looked at my husband, wondering if he noticed how Melissa's eyes sparkled at that phrase. Damien leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "It's really the practical thing, Mom. You and Dad shouldn't have to worry about money or paperwork. We'll make sure everything is handled properly." Melissa reached for my hand, squeezing it just enough to feel rehearsed warmth. "You can trust us," she said softly. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was love, not calculation. So I signed. When it was over, Melissa hugged me tightly. "Now we're officially a family forever," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. The words should have been comforting, but they landed like a sentence. That night the house was too quiet. Henry sat in his chair by the fireplace, staring at the dancing flames. "It's done," he said finally. "Now we can relax." But I couldn't. Something in me had shifted. I walked through the house, touching the furniture Henry had built, the photographs lining the hallway, Richard as a child, with a wooden toy, Damien as a boy, clutching his brother's arm. Each image felt like a lie we'd framed and hung up for show. In the following weeks, Damien and Melissa came more often, but their visits carried a strange urgency. They no longer came to laugh or share dinner. They came to advise. "You should think about downsizing," Damien said one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway. "This house is too much for you both. You'd be more comfortable in a small apartment, less to clean, fewer stairs. It's for your safety." Melissa nodded, glancing around like a real estate agent inspecting property. "It's a smart move, Hilda. The market's high right now. You'd get a great price." I set down the knife I'd been using to chop carrots. "We built our lives here. Every nail, every beam your father made it with his hands. We're not leaving." Damien's smile faltered, his jaw tightening before he caught himself. "I just want what's best for you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. He blinked momentarily, caught off guard, then laughed. "Of course, Mom." Later that night, I found Henry sitting at his desk, a cup of untouched coffee beside him. "He's right," he said softly. "This place is too big. Maybe it's time we think about the future." I stared at him, unable to find words. For 40 years, this man had built everything around the idea of home, and now he sounded ready to hand it over. "You're starting to believe them," I whispered. "I'm starting to believe we're getting old," he replied, not meeting my eyes. Sleep became difficult after that. I'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard footsteps downstairs. Sometimes I'd find Damien in the morning already in the workshop, claiming he'd dropped by early to help Henry. Other times Melissa would arrive with groceries, smiling too wide, insisting she wanted to make breakfast. But there was a pattern to it: how they checked the mail, how they asked about our insurance, how they lingered in the study where Henry kept our financial papers. One afternoon, while Melissa was in the kitchen brewing tea, I noticed her phone screen reflected in the glass cabinet. She was taking pictures not of us, but of our documents spread on the table. When she caught me watching, she smiled easily, slipping the phone into her purse. "Just making a grocery list," she said. I didn't confront her, not yet. But that night I couldn't shake the feeling that our home was no longer ours. Every corner held a shadow, every laugh a calculation. And through it all I began to see something in Henry's eyes, a flicker of guilt buried deep. He would reach for my hand more often, squeeze it, as if trying to apologize for something he hadn't said yet. I didn't know it then, but the secret he'd been keeping for 25 years was beginning to break through the cracks, just like the family we had spent a lifetime pretending was whole. The night Henry finally told me the truth, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway like a heartbeat. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the smell of cedar drifted in from his workshop. I had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts circling the same dark corners they had for months. Damien's visits had become unbearable, too polite, too strategic. Every smile from him felt like a negotiation. Every "love you," Mom sounded like a warning. Henry stirred beside me. "You're not sleeping again," he said softly. "I can't," I whispered. "Something's wrong with him, Henry. I can feel it." He didn't answer right away. He sat up, rubbing his temples the way he always did when he carried more than he could say. "There's something you need to know," he said finally. His voice wasn't angry or defensive, it was tired, hollow. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." I turned toward him, my stomach tightening. "What do you mean?" "It's about Richard," he said. The way he spoke our son's name slowly like a confession made the air in the room feel heavier. That night, the night he died. It wasn't an accident. I stopped breathing. "What are you saying?" Henry stared at his hands, the same hands that had built our home, our furniture, our life. They trembled now, as if remembering everything they had failed to protect. "I followed Damien that night," he said. "He wasn't studying like he told us. He left the house just after 8. I knew something was wrong. He'd been acting strange for days, angry, restless, jealous. I could barely speak. You followed him where? To the gorge," he said. I parked by the road and walked the rest of the way. When I got there, I saw them. Richard and Damien. They were fighting. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to understand. Richard had found out Damien was stealing money from our savings. He had proof bank statements transfers. He confronted him. Damien tried to deny it, but Richard wouldn't let up. He said he'd tell us everything in the morning. Henry's voice cracked. That's when it happened. Damien pushed him. I closed my eyes, the words sinking into me like shards of glass. What? It wasn't an accident, Hilda. He pushed him. Richard tried to grab onto a branch, but he lost his footing. He fell. Henry was crying now quietly, like a man who'd been waiting years for permission. When I reached the edge, it was too late. I saw him lying at the bottom. Damien was standing there, shaking, saying over and over, "It was an accident, Dad. He slipped. I didn't mean to." He begged me to help him, to believe him. And I did. God forgive me, I did. I couldn't move. My body felt foreign, heavy. "You knew," my voice was barely a whisper. "You knew all these years and you said nothing." Henry nodded, shame written all over his face. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting what was left of our family. I couldn't bring one son back by destroying the other. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make the pain find a shape I could fight. But I just sat there shaking. The man beside me, the man I had loved for 40 years, had been carrying this secret while I mourned a lie. "Do you know what it's like," I said through my tears, "to hold your child's photograph every day and ask why? And you—" My voice broke. "You could have given me an answer." "I know," he whispered. "And that's the worst part. Every time you cried, every time you lit a candle for Richard, I wanted to tell you. But Damien promised me he'd change. He said it had been an accident, that he'd make us proud again. And for a while I believed him. He became helpful, affectionate, the son you thought he was. I wanted to believe that was redemption, not manipulation." I pressed my palms to my face, trying to breathe. The room spun. "You let me love a murderer." Henry flinched. I let myself believe he wasn't one. The rain outside grew harder, streaking the windows like veins of light. I stared at them, seeing not the reflection of our bedroom, but of that gorge, black, endless, swallowing the truth for 25 years. "What about now?" I asked. "Do you still believe him?" Henry looked away. "No," he said finally. "Not anymore. He's after something else now, Hilda. He wants our money. That's why he's been pushing us to sell the house to change the will. I've been looking into his finances quietly. The business Whitmore Crafts is failing. He owes over $100,000 to banks and suppliers." My chest tightened. So this everything was for money? Henry's eyes filled with tears. It was always for money. Richard found out first. Now he's trying to make sure we never can. The truth hung between us, terrible and complete. The walls of our home, once built with love, seemed to close in the air, thick with betrayal. I didn't cry then. I couldn't. I just sat there in silence, feeling the weight of every year we'd lived in ignorance, every Sunday dinner shared with the son who had killed his brother. And as the rain washed against the glass, I understood something I had never wanted to believe: evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it grows quietly inside the family you'd die to protect. The phone rang the next morning, cutting through the fog of sleeplessness that hung over our room. Henry and I hadn't spoken much since his confession. Words had become too fragile, too dangerous. They only reminded us of what could never be undone. He reached for the phone, his voice strained. "Hello?" I watched his face as he listened. A familiar name brought a flicker of fear to his eyes. "Damien," he mouthed. "Mom, Dad." Damien's voice came through the receiver, bright, cheerful, almost childlike. "Melissa and I were thinking it's your 40th anniversary this weekend. We want to do something special for you both. How about a little trip, the four of us, just family time, somewhere peaceful?" Henry's eyes met mine. He didn't need to say what we both understood. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. "That's very thoughtful, son," Henry said, forcing a calmness that sounded unnatural. "Where were you thinking?" "The Cascades," Damien replied quickly. "Remember that trail we used to hike when we were kids, Dad? The one near Silver Ridge." "It's beautiful this time of year. We could have a picnic, take some pictures. You'll love it." The blood in my veins turned to ice. I remembered that trail, a steep climb with cliffs that fell hundreds of feet into the valley below, the perfect place for an accident. Henry nodded, pretending to listen. "That sounds lovely. Let us think about it and call you back." When he hung up, the silence between us roared. "He's going to kill us there," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. It was a statement of fact. Henry rubbed his face, his hands trembling. "I know. What do we do?" "We go," he said, and my heart nearly stopped. "Go. If we refuse, he'll find another way. Something worse, something we can't predict. At least if we go, we'll know where it's coming from. We can be ready." Ready. The word felt meaningless. How could anyone be ready for their own murder? Henry stood, went to his desk, and opened the drawer where he kept the family papers. "I'm recording everything from now on," he said. "Every word, every look. If something happens, there will be proof." He pulled out an old smartphone and tested the recorder. "It still works. I'll hide it in my jacket pocket." "And if we don't survive?" I asked. He paused, then opened another drawer. From it, he pulled a sealed envelope. "Then this goes to your sister Harriet. Inside is everything what I told you about Richard, what's happening now, everything Damien's done. If we don't come back, she'll know where to find it." I wanted to argue, to scream, to run, but instead I nodded, because deep down I already knew this was the only way. The days that followed felt like a countdown. Damien and Melissa visited twice before the trip, each time bringing food and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "I'm so excited for this weekend," Melissa said on Thursday, setting a grocery bag on the counter. "I bought trail mix fruit water and a new camera. I want to capture every moment. Every moment." I could almost hear the edge in her words. "That's sweet of you, dear," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It'll be nice to get some fresh air." Damien grinned. "It'll be a trip to remember." When they left, Henry and I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear down the street. His hand found mine. No matter what happens, he said softly, stay close to me. Don't panic. If we get a chance to act, we act together. I nodded. And if we don't? He looked out toward the horizon. Then we make sure the truth doesn't die with us. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through our house, and let my fingers brush over every surface: the table Henry built for our wedding anniversary, the clock that Richard had fixed as a teenager, the family photos lining the hallway. They no longer felt like memories. They felt like goodbyes. Henry stayed up late in the workshop. I heard the faint hum of his tools, the soft thud of wood against wood. When I went down to check on him, he was sitting at his workbench, staring at a half-carved chair leg. I started this for Richard, he murmured. Never finished it. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Finish it when we get back. He gave me a small, broken smile. If we get back? Friday came too soon. Damien called early, his voice chipper. We'll pick you up at 7 sharp, Mom. Pack light. We ate breakfast in silence. Henry checked his phone one last time, made sure the recorder was ready. I wrote a note and slipped it into the drawer beneath our wedding photo. If we don't come back, start with the lawyer. When the doorbell rang, Melissa's laughter spilled in before she did. She looked radiant, dressed in hiking gear, her hair tied neatly. Damien followed, carrying a backpack full of supplies. Ready, Mom. Dad. This is going to be great. Henry forced a grin. We're ready. As we locked the front door, I felt the weight of finality in the click of the key. We walked to their car, the morning sun glinting off the hood like a cruel spotlight. Melissa handed me a bottle of water. To staying young forever, she said with a smile that made my stomach twist. I managed a polite nod, gripping the strap of my bag until my knuckles went white. As the car pulled away from our house, I turned to look out the window one last time. The maple tree swayed gently in the wind, scattering its golden leaves across the porch. It looked almost peaceful, like a photograph taken a moment before the storm. The road wound through the mountains like a long, quiet snake. The morning sun filtered through tall evergreens, painting stripes of light across the windshield. Damien was at the wheel, humming along to a cheerful tune on the radio, while Melissa flipped through the songs on her phone. Their laughter filled the car, but to me it sounded like the prelude to something dark and inevitable. Henry sat beside me in the back seat, silent, his hand resting lightly on mine. I could feel the tremor in his fingers. Every few miles our eyes met in the rearview mirror, his gaze asking the question neither of us dared to speak aloud. When will it happen? It's a perfect day for a hike, Damien said, glancing back at us. The air up here is cleaner than anything you'll breathe in town. You'll feel 20 years younger by the time we're done. Henry gave a short nod. Can't wait to see it. His voice was steady, almost casual. No one would have guessed that the phone in his jacket pocket was recording every word. Melissa leaned over the seat, her smile bright and practiced. I brought everything we need: sandwiches, water, the new camera. Oh, and safety gear. She laughed softly. Damien insisted we be extra careful this time. That last word time hung in the air, thin and sharp. After 2 hours of driving, the road narrowed into gravel, and the forest grew thicker. When the car finally stopped, I looked out the window at the trailhead. The sign read, Silver Ridge Overlook, 2 miles. I had to steady myself before getting out. The air was crisp, but my heart felt heavy as stone. Melissa clapped her hands together. Let's go. The view from the top is breathtaking. Breathtaking. I almost laughed at the irony. The first stretch of the trail was easy, a gentle climb through pine and wildflowers. The ground was damp from rain the night before, and the scent of earth mixed with the hum of bees. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe it was just a family outing, just laughter, nature, and love. But then I caught the way Damien's eyes lingered on the steep drop-offs, how Melissa subtly guided our steps closer to the outer edge of the path. Henry's breathing grew heavy as the incline steepened. Let's rest a bit, I said, hoping to slow things down. Of course, Damien said too quickly. You need to pace yourselves. He set his backpack down and unzipped it. Inside, I caught a glimpse of ropes, a first aid kit, and what looked like a flare gun. What's that for? I asked, trying to sound curious rather than afraid. Damien smiled. Safety, in case someone gets lost or hurt. You never know. Melissa touched his arm, laughing softly. He's always prepared. You raised a smart man, Hilda. I managed a small nod. My throat was too tight for words. As we continued, the trees thinned, giving way to open sky. The sound of a river drifted up from far below its murmur like a whisper from the earth itself. The sun was bright now, glinting off the rocks that lined the narrow path. Ahead of us, a ridge jutted out over the valley, a jagged, beautiful place where the world seemed to end. "Oh, look," Melissa exclaimed. "That's perfect for photos." She pointed toward the cliff where the view opened into a breathtaking panorama of the valley. The drop was sheer, the rocks below distant and unforgiving. "Maybe we should stay here," I said, forcing a smile. "It's already beautiful enough." "Nonsense," Damien replied. "We've come this far. You'll regret not seeing it from the edge." Henry's hand brushed mine, a silent warning, a reminder to hold steady. We followed them up the narrow path that led to the overlook. The wind picked up cool and strong, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. "Careful now," Melissa said, stepping gracefully onto the flat rock at the top. "It's safe if you stay near the middle." Henry and I moved slowly, every step deliberate. Damien came behind us, his movements too close, too controlled. "Stand over there," Melissa said, motioning toward the edge. "I want the valley in the background. It'll be a perfect family photo." I could see the excitement in her eyes, not the kind born from beauty, but from anticipation. She lifted the camera, adjusting the lens. Henry's arm went around my shoulders. "All right," he said softly. "Just keep calm." "Smile," Melissa called out. We did. For the last time. I felt Damien step closer behind us. The air shifted, his presence a shadow pressing against my back. Then his voice low, almost tender. "One more step back, Mom. The light's better there." Henry stiffened. "We're fine right here," he said. But Damien moved faster than I could react. His hand shoved against Henry's shoulder, hard and deliberate. Henry stumbled, his foot slipping on the loose gravel. I screamed as I grabbed his arm. For a moment we were a tangled mess of limbs, me pulling him, Damien pushing us both, Melissa shouting something I couldn't hear over the rush of wind. Then everything gave way. The sky spun above me, blue and endless. I heard Henry yell my name, heard Melissa scream. The ground raced up to meet us, and time shattered into fragments of color and sound, the crack of bones, the sting of air, the metallic taste of blood. When everything stopped, the world was still. The pain was blinding, but the silence was worse. I blinked, disoriented, and through the haze saw Henry a few feet away, blood on his face, his eyes barely open. He turned toward me, lips trembling. "Hilda," he whispered. "Don't move." His voice was faint but certain, carrying the last strength he had left. "Play dead." And I did. Because in that moment I understood our only chance to live was to make our son believe he had finally finished what he started. The world was a blur of pain and silence. I lay twisted among cold stones and wild ferns, the air thick with the smell of iron and earth. Every breath came jagged, shallow. Somewhere above, a hawk cried a sound so distant it might have come from another lifetime. I wanted to scream, but Henry's voice echoed in my head, "Don't move! Play dead!" So I stayed still. Even the smallest twitch sent fire through my ribs. My body was a map of agony, but I clung to his command like a prayer. Footsteps crunched on gravel a few yards away. Damien's voice, low and strained, cut through the ringing in my ears. "Melissa." "Are you okay?" A groan answered him. "My leg. I think it's broken." I forced my eyes open a sliver. Through the blur of blood and tears I could see them, Damien crawling toward her, one arm dragging uselessly. They were both alive. The fall had not finished any of us. He glanced in my direction and I froze. My heart pounded so loud I feared it would betray me. "The old people," Melissa rasped. "They're dead," Damien said after a pause. "Both of them." I checked. His voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my stomach twist. "Perfect," she whispered, her tone dripping with relief. "It worked then. God, it hurts. But it worked. I felt the air leave my lungs. Worked. The word burned like acid. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the river below murmured steady and cold. Then Damien said, "We need to think. We can't just stay here. We'll crawl until we get a signal call for help. We tell them it was an accident that Dad slipped, tried to grab Mom, and pulled us down too. That's it. Same story we planned. We practiced this," Melissa muttered. "We'll stick to it. Grieving survivors." Her bitter laugh echoed off the rocks. "Maybe now finally we can live." They began to drag themselves toward the slope, their movements slow and painful. I watched until the sound of their labored breathing faded into the distance. Then, and only then, I dared to whisper, "Henry." He groaned faintly, his voice barely there. "I'm here." Relief flooded through me so fierce it hurt more than the pain. "Can you move?" "My leg's gone," he murmured, "but I'm breathing." I crawled toward him, every inch of movement a battle. When I reached him, his face was pale and bloodied, his eyes unfocused but alive, his left leg bent at an angle that no human body should endure. I pressed my trembling hand to his chest. His heartbeat was weak but steady. "They think we're dead," I whispered. "They're gone for help." He nodded slowly, wincing. "Good." The phone my jacket, it's still recording. I reached into his pocket, fingers slick with blood, and pulled it out. The screen was cracked, but the red light still blinked. "You recorded everything I said." "Everything that matters," he whispered. "If we die here, someone will find it." The thought of dying didn't frighten me as much as it should have. Maybe because in some cruel way we already had. The life we'd known, the family we'd believed in, was over. All that remained was survival and truth. Hours passed, the sunlight shifted and cooled. My wounds stiffened and the chill crept into my bones. We tried to speak, but even whispering drained what little strength we had left. The forest around us grew quiet save for the river and the occasional rustle of wind. I don't remember when I started crying. Maybe it was when I thought of Richard, the son whose death had started this chain of ruin. Maybe it was when I realized that Damien, the child I'd carried and nursed and defended, had turned that same blood against us. I leaned closer to Henry, brushing the dirt from his forehead. "I'm sorry," I said softly, "for not seeing it sooner, for letting love blind me." He smiled faintly, his lips cracked. "We both wanted to believe he could be saved." "Do you still believe that his eyes opened just enough to meet mine?" "No," he said. "Not anymore." A shiver ran through me. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of voices rose, shouting, calling. At first I thought it was my imagination. Then came the unmistakable hum of an engine, the whirring of helicopter blades slicing through the air. "They found them," Henry murmured. "They'll bring rescuers soon." I nodded, gripping the phone in my hand like a lifeline. Then we wait. We lay there as the sound grew louder, the forest trembling beneath the force of the approaching rescue. When I saw the first glint of red through the trees, I turned to Henry. His breathing was shallow, his skin gray. "Stay with me," I whispered. "I'll try," he said. Then his eyes fluttered shut. The wind from the helicopter swept over us, scattering dust and leaves. I closed my eyes and pretended again to be dead, to be nothing, because if Damien and Melissa saw me breathing, the rescue would turn into another trap. When the rescuers finally reached us, their voices echoed above like the voices of angels. "We've got 2 bodies down here," one of them shouted. "No response possible. Fatalities." Hands touched my wrist, checked my pulse. "Faint heartbeat," a man said. "We can still save her." I wanted to speak, to tell them everything, but my body betrayed me. Darkness pulled at the edges of my vision. The last thing I heard before slipping into unconsciousness was Henry's broken whisper close to my ear. "If we live through this, Hilda, make sure they pay." And then the world went black, swallowing the forest, the river, and 40 years of love and betrayal in a single breath. When I opened my eyes, everything was white, the ceiling, the sheets, the harsh fluorescent light that hummed above me. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled my lungs. For a moment, I didn't know if I was alive or dreaming. Then pain bloomed deep in my ribs, reminding me that this wasn't heaven. It was a hospital. I tried to turn my head but stopped when fire shot through my shoulder. The beeping of machines echoed softly, keeping rhythm with my uneven breaths. Somewhere nearby, I heard a nurse's voice, calm and low. "She's waking up." I blinked, and the world came into focus. A woman in scrubs leaning over me, her face kind but cautious. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently, "you're safe. You've been through a terrible accident. Try not to move." Her words, "you're safe," meant nothing yet. I didn't know what safety was anymore. "Henry." I managed to whisper, my throat raw. "He's alive," she said quickly. "He's in the room next door. Critical but stable." I closed my eyes in relief. Tears pooled behind my lids, stinging like salt in a wound. For a few seconds, I allowed myself to feel only that relief. Then the memory returned, Damien's hand shoving Henry's shoulder, Melissa's cold laughter, the cliff. "They thought we were dead." The nurse her name tag read. Inez adjusted my IV. "Your son and daughter-in-law were here earlier," she said, her voice gentle. "They were very upset. They're in the waiting area if you'd like to." "No." The word burst from my chest before I could stop it. Pain flared in my ribs. Inez froze, her eyes wide. I forced myself to speak through the pain. "Please, don't let them in." Her gaze flickered uncertain. "You're saying they did this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They pushed us." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then something shifted in her expression, a quiet, horrified understanding. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "If that's true, we'll help you. But you need to stay calm. Pretend you're still weak. I'll get the doctor and the police." She left the room, her soft footsteps fading down the hall. I stared at the ceiling, fighting the fear clawing up my throat. Every second felt like an eternity. What if she didn't believe me? What if she told them instead? The door opened again, but it wasn't Inez. It was Damien. He stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind him. His face was pale, his arm wrapped in a sling, but his eyes were steady, calculated. "Mom," he said softly, walking closer. "You're awake." Thank God. I couldn't move. My hands gripped the sheets. He pulled a chair to the bedside, his tone smooth as ever. "The doctors said you might not make it. Melissa's been crying for hours." He smiled faintly. "We were so scared." Liar. Every syllable tasted like poison. He reached out, brushing my hand with his fingertips. I flinched. He noticed. Still in pain, he asked, pretending concern. Then after a pause, he leaned closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You should have just trusted me, Mom. Some things are better left buried, like Richard." My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, the room blurred. I couldn't tell if it was the medication or fury that made the walls tilt. He straightened his expression smooth again. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We'll take care of everything." When he left, I could still feel the chill of his words, but what he didn't know was that a nurse had been standing just outside the door. Inez stepped back, and a moment later, eyes wide, her voice trembling. "I heard him," she said. "Every word." Hope flickered inside me for the first time in days. Within the hour, 2 police officers arrived. They spoke to Inez first, then entered my room quietly. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, introduced himself. "Detective Johnson. Mrs. Whitmore, we believe you're in danger. We'd like to know what really happened on that mountain." It all came out then, the will, the pressure, Henry's confession, the trip, the fall. Every word cracked something open inside me, but I didn't stop. I told him about Richard, about Damien's debts, about the night Henry confessed that our son's hands were already stained with blood long before the cliff. When I finished, my voice was gone. Detective Johnson nodded solemnly. "We'll need Henry's statement, too," he said. "And you mentioned a recording." I nodded weakly. "It's on his phone, in his jacket. It recorded everything." Johnson's eyes sharpened. "That's the evidence we need." He left to find Henry, while I lay there trembling, exhausted but alive. For the first time in decades, the truth wasn't just inside us, it was out. Hours later, the detective returned, his tone measured but tense. "We have the recording," he said. "It's clear enough, your son and daughter-in-law discussing their plan. That's more than enough to arrest them." Through the window, I could see the reflection of red and blue lights flashing in the hospital parking lot. Then faintly I heard shouting. Damien's voice, angry, desperate, echoed through the hall. "You can't arrest me. They're lying. They're dead." A pause. Then the sound of cuffs clicking shut. I turned my face toward the window. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the sky washed in pink and gold. For years that horizon had meant peace, family, love. Now it meant something else, an ending. When the nurse came to check my vitals, I asked one question. "Henry?" She smiled softly. "He's awake, and he's asking for you." They wheeled me into his room. He looked small beneath the hospital lights, fragile but alive. When he saw me, his lips trembled into a smile. "They got him," I whispered. "I know," he said. "I heard." We sat in silence for a while, our hands finding each other, our eyes heavy with everything that couldn't be spoken. The truth had finally surfaced, but it had cost us everything we'd ever loved. And as I held the hand of the man who had shared my life, I wondered if survival was truly a victory, or simply the punishment for loving too deeply what should never have been forgiven. A year had passed since that day in the mountains, but time had not dulled the memory. It had only made it quieter, like an old scar you stop noticing until it aches again in the rain. Our house no longer stood on Maple Street. After the trial, Henry and I sold it and moved to a smaller home near the Oregon coast, where the air smelled of salt and pine instead of sawdust and regret. We didn't take much with us. Just a few photographs, Henry's old tools, and Richard's camera, the one that had captured our family before everything shattered. I couldn't bear to keep Damien's things. Even saying his name still felt like pressing on a bruise that hadn't healed. Henry moved slowly these days. His leg had never fully recovered, and he needed a cane to walk. But he had a quiet determination that both broke and comforted me. Every morning, he went out to the small shed behind the house and worked for an hour or two, sanding wood, repairing old chairs, building birdhouses for the children down the road. He said it helped keep his hands from remembering the night he held a secret too long. I found my own healing in the garden. I planted roses, one white for Richard, one red for Henry, and one pale yellow for the grandchildren we were trying to raise out of the ashes of our family. Their laughter, fragile at first, slowly began to fill the empty corners of our days. Ethan was 9, and Lily was 6 when we took them in. They arrived at our door with a social worker and a single suitcase, each, their eyes wide and wary. They didn't understand the words murder or trial, not really. All they knew was that their parents had gone away and the world had stopped making sense. For months, Lily woke up crying for her mother. I would hold her until dawn, whispering stories about angels and brave hearts and how love sometimes had to wear armor. Ethan didn't cry. He watched everything quietly, his face so much like Damien's that at first it hurt to look at him. But one evening, he came to me while I was watering the roses and asked, "Grandma, are my parents bad people?" The question caught in my throat. I looked down at his small, searching face and saw the same conflict I carried inside me, the need to understand, the need to still love. "They made terrible choices," I said, finally, kneeling beside him. "But you don't have to be like them, Ethan. You get to choose who you become." He thought about it for a long time, then nodded. "I want to be like Uncle Richard," he said. That night after they went to bed, I sat on the porch with Henry. The sound of the waves in the distance reminded me of that night so long ago when we'd dreamed of retiring by the sea, watching the fog lift like a curtain. "Do you think we'll ever stop paying for what we didn't see?" I asked quietly. Henry sighed, staring out at the horizon. "We already paid, Hilda. We paid in grief and silence. Now we're living on what's left. Maybe that's enough." He reached for my hand, and I felt the familiar roughness of his skin. It wasn't forgiveness we shared, it was endurance, the kind that grows out of surviving the impossible together. The trial had ended with life sentences for Damien and Melissa. No parole. Their names appeared in newspapers for months, each headline colder than the last couple convicted in parents' attempted murder. But I never read beyond the first lines. I didn't need to. The courtroom had been the last time I saw my son. He hadn't looked at me when the verdict was read. His eyes were fixed on the floor, as if the tiles could offer him a way out. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he turned once, just once, and looked at me. There was no apology in that look, no plea for forgiveness, only emptiness. A man hollowed out by greed and fear. I realized then that the boy I had loved, the one who laughed under the maple tree and built toy airplanes with his brother, had died the same night Richard did. What remained was a stranger wearing my son's face. Now, when I tuck Ethan and Lily into bed, I tell them stories about Richard instead. I tell them how he loved to fix broken things, how he believed every mistake could be mended with patience and care. I never mention their parents, but sometimes Lily asks, will they ever come back? I always answer gently, not for a long time. After the children sleep, I walk out to the garden. The roses sway under the moonlight, their petals trembling in the ocean breeze. The white one, the one for Richard, has grown the tallest, reaching toward the stars, as if trying to touch something beyond this world. I kneel beside it and press my palm into the soil. It's warm alive. You can rest now, I whisper. We're safe. Behind me, Henry's cane taps softly against the porch as he comes to stand beside me. He doesn't speak. He just looks at the roses, at the ocean beyond, and then at me. His eyes, weary but kind, hold the only truth that matters: we survived. And survival, I've learned, isn't the same as happiness. It's quieter, lonelier, but it's real. It's the space left behind after pain has burned everything false away. When dawn comes, the sky turns the color of old gold. The first light hits the water, and for a moment the whole world glows. I take Henry's hand. It's beautiful, I say. He smiles faintly. It always was. We just forgot how to see it. And as the waves crash softly against the shore, I realize he's right. The world hasn't changed. We have. We're no longer living for what was lost, but for what still breathes fragile and true in the morning light.